What's up, man?
Hey,
how you doing?
Thanks for coming over.
No, of course, man. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Like I said, when I saw that you were also in Cannon,
yeah,
I got excited. I'm like, okay, we got to do something with Chip. Because since I got here, you were always one of my favorite Republicans.
Well, it's probably a low bar, right?
No.
No, I appreciate that. And like you're always, it's always great. I tell like folks that are engaged, let's engage honestly and figure out where we're going to go.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I used to watch your talks on the floor, I was like, damn, he's really passionate, and I always appreciate passion. And I wanted to have this conversation just to show the world that you can have a great conversation, a smart conversation
100%.
with people you don't agree with 100% of the time. And so I just wanted to reach out and say, let's talk about the country. We're both Americans. We both care about this country. We both want to see the country be the best version of itself.
Yep.
So I wanted to talk about how we might do that. So
love to do it. Yeah, I've got some of my closest friends and allies are Democrats on the other side of the aisle here in town, and my friend Abigail Spanberger from Virginia. We both went to the University of Virginia, and Dean Phillips and I worked together on the PPP Flexibility Act. Henry Cuellar and I worked together on a lot of things, and look forward to working with you and have this conversation.
No, absolutely. Just quick background.
Yeah.
So this is my second term in Congress.
Yep.
I come from education. I worked in education for 20 years. I represent New York's 16th district, which is the Northeast Bronx and Lower Westchester County.
Yep.
My district is very diverse in terms of economically and racially. It's also very segregated and separated, which is one of the reasons why I ran, to begin to deal with that issue a little bit. Now, you've been here longer than me.
Only a term. So this is my third term.
Okay.
And I ran in 2018. Now, I kind of served a term, if you will, when I was Senator Cruz's chief of staff. So I had some experience on the Hill as a staffer. And I was a lawyer for John Cornyn, the other Texas senator. So I've been in and out, worked for Governor Perry, been in the private sector. I was a federal prosecutor for a bit. Before I went to law school, I worked in banking and finance for what was then Nations Bank, now Bank of America. So kind of, been around. I joke around on the stump that I can't hold a job. My resume is a little, it's been packed with a lot of things, a lot of stuff. But the Lord's blessed me with an opportunity to see a whole lot of the world from a lot of different angles. So it's been good.
So your background is law and quote unquote politics. My background is education.
That's right.
So
yeah.
that's
I worked
good.
in finance for 4 or 5 years before law and stuff. But yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Now, what about your district? How diverse is it?
Yeah.
What sort of?
So I represent what we call the Texas Hill Country, which is the district from basically Austin and southwest, and San Antonio and kind of west and northwest. All are part of 10 counties. Towns like Fredericksburg, Kerrville, Bernie, the famous Lukenbach, Lukenbach, Texas, the famous song, there's a sign up on the wall, is right in the center of the district I represent. It's heavily a mix of Anglo and Hispanic, as you would expect in Texas, and in particular in San Antonio and that part of the country. There's a lot of German ancestry there because of the Great Migration there in the 1800s, and so that's where you get towns like Lukenbach and New Braunfels and these kind of German historic towns.
What about economic diversity?
Yeah, so we're a mix, right? Because it's both highly urban and rural. So I've got farmers and ranchers, and I've got significant corporate ties and military ties because we've got Joint Base San Antonio. I represent Fort Sam Houston and in San Antonio. I represent all the way down to just a little north of the Alamo, so kind of the northern piece of the pie in San Antonio. I used to represent Austin, a good chunk of it for my first 2 terms. Redistricting, I got pushed out a little bit. I still represent Southwest Austin, just not as much of it. And so pretty diverse in terms of a lot of Fortune 500 companies. I mean, Yeti's in my district. We've got, USAA is just out of my district. Valero is just out of my district. But, lots of overlap in those communities.
Got it. So we both obviously ran for office because, we felt like we had something to offer.
Yep.
We want to serve. We want to help our constituents. Want to see the country moving forward. And I wanted to discuss with you just different ways of getting there.
Sure.
And so we could talk about the economy, education, immigration. One of the things that always drew me to you is you talk a lot about the economy and what we need to do in the economy to make sure the country works for everyone. We agree the country isn't where it needs to be.
Sure.
So how do we get there in your opinion?
So, look, I'm a big believer in the American dream and opportunity and giving people the ability to succeed, right? And you obviously, in education, you believe that, right? And you got to start with those fundamentals. I believe, as a limited government conservative, proudly part of the Freedom Caucus, et cetera. I believe it works best when government is least involved. I believe it's best when individuals are free to go succeed and to pursue their dream with limited interference from regulatory state, high taxes, et cetera. I happen to think right now, and there may be some agreement here, maybe not, I don't know. I happen to think right now it's been tilted for a variety of reasons too much towards big corporate America and the sort of corporate government relationship that is driving so much of our economy instead of bottom-up small businesses and families. I believe that America was built on the back of people coming here, trying to make it work, hanging a shingle and putting up a business, starting their own farm, whatever. And now, you look at, healthcare, these guys are making just the vast majority of the revenue directly from the federal government. You've got massive corporations, whether it's big tech, healthcare, go down the line, energy companies of all stripes that are getting the lion's share of their income through government and what I might call corporate cronyism. I think that's a problem. I want to break that down. I gave a speech on the floor last night that I don't like it when the elites are running this country, and I want it to be more biased towards small businesses and families being able to get a leg up. So I think we've got a lot of room we need to for us to make some changes in the tax code and the regulatory state to be hopefully a little bit more biased towards small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on that tax code piece because I'm right there with you in terms of reforming the tax code. I believe the wealthiest Americans are not contributing their fair share, and I believe that large corporations are not contributing their fair share. And I think the corporate problem is a huge problem, big corporations, because we have big money in politics. I think that distorts our democracy and doesn't create an even playing field for working class people to even think about running for office, because corporations usually support those who support them, who are okay with the infrastructure as it's designed. I agree with the small business piece. I think these large corporations and these corporate monopolies are crushing American small business across the board, regardless of background, regardless of race, or regardless of whatever we want to look at. I also think historically, those large corporations and the wealthy elite represent a certain demographic that has looked negatively upon other demographics, whether these are poor people in rural communities or black and brown people in urban communities. So for me, the reason for government is to make sure we respond to what you just described. Like, we can't allow corporations to continue to thrive at the way that they're thriving while the small people are not having an opportunity. We can't allow the wealthy elite to thrive in that way without working class people and labor having an opportunity. And we can't allow some of the discriminatory policies that have been in place historically, whether it's redlining or how we fund public education in certain communities. We can't allow those things to happen either. And that's where that's why I think government is needed, as opposed to us backing away from what government is supposed to do, because the corporations, there hasn't been trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics has not really worked for the majority of American people.
Well, this is where, and we could probably spend a whole hour on just this subject, but this is where we're getting the nuances where we're going to see some differences. I'm not bothered by a significant amount of profits for corporations that get distributed to shareholders, many of whom are people across the economic spectrum who have investments in their savings and whether they're in their 401ks or they're in their individual retirement accounts, or just simply by being hired as an employee of a large corporation. I mean, Bank of America has however many employees, right? Google has however many employees, et cetera, et cetera. My concern is a little different. And we could play with the tax rates, and I'm happy to have those conversations about figuring out how to make them the simplest. I want a flatter rate that has less, or I should say fewer loopholes. Right? I don't like it when the corporations with lawyers can come in. Applebee's can roll in on the corner of a street and say, we got all the lawyers, we can deal with the regulations, we'll get this in place. But I just want to go start up a little barbecue shop in Southwest Austin. I can't do it because I can't figure out how to navigate all the stuff. I want to simplify those things. So I come at it a little different way. But the concerns are somewhat similar. My problem is that when I call Southwest Airlines up and I say, guys, why aren't you standing with, and we might disagree on this or not, but why aren't you standing with your pilots and your flight attendants who are concerned about vaccines and masks? Now, we can agree or disagree on the whole mask vaccine issue, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the mandate. Their response was, well, we've got some really big federal contracts. that ain't good, right? Because they're sitting there going, if we decide to go stand with our pilots and our flight attendants, we might lose our $500 million contract with DOD or whoever they've got their contract with. That's where I start to get a whole lot of concern about how integrated corporate America is with government. Because now you're on the dole for massive contracts, insurance companies, right? If you look at, I can't remember, Humana and some of these others, they get upwards of 80 or 90% of their profit from government contracts. Well, that ain't a market. And so, I mean, you either want to go full on single payer healthcare, and you might want to go there, some of your colleagues might want to.
Actually.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would argue we should have a straight up debate about single payer healthcare or actually a market oriented healthcare. But this bastardized version we have in between is total garbage because it's enriching a handful of elites through government contracts, these massive insurance contracts, to manage our healthcare. And frankly, they're managing it crappily. And so I would rather free up and give more room for direct primary care and doctors to thrive. You might want to go more single payer, but I can tell you the system we got, in my opinion, is garbage because it's enriching the few at the expense of the many.
No, absolutely. And in terms of the expense of the many, you know, we have the majority of Americans can't respond to a $400 emergency because they don't have enough money in their bank account. So that goes directly to the issue of wages, right? And this is connected to corporations, and the federal government has a say in that in terms of raising the federal minimum wage, for example, right? We have places in this country where the minimum wage is $7.50 an hour, which is completely unacceptable. And there has to be a balance, in my opinion, between the so-called market and our capitalism, which I believe is toxic and exploitative in many, many ways. Has to be a balance between the private sector and the public sector. And right now, we don't see that balance. We see CEOs making enormous amounts of money while labor is struggling to pay their bills. And labor are the ones who are actually doing the work to build the wealth for the company in the first place. So when I think about our economy and when you talk about access and opportunity, we're talking about ensuring everyone is paid a prevailing wage, ensure that they're able to afford childcare, have access to healthcare, afford housing, afford food on the table and clothes on the back, but also afford to keep a little bit of money on the side so they can, you know, invest in the market or invest in something.
But the fundamental question.
One last point.
Yeah.
The thing about trickle-down economics, what we see happening is corporations, we incentivize corporations doing more to buy back stocks than create the jobs. The corporations aren't creating the jobs that we need and they're not paying a living wage, but they're buying back stocks, fattening their own pockets and growing their own corporations' wealth, while the majority of the American people are not seeing access and opportunity to that American dream from a financial standpoint. So
that's painting with a very broad brushstroke across a whole lot of different economic concepts and principles, right? Trickle down, which is, depending how you define it, either pejorative or if you're for it, it's a way of viewing that, hey, create economic growth, and that's going to flow down to everybody throughout the entire economy. Now, you know, you see that in real time with the economic growth. We've had significant economic growth in Texas for the better part of 20 years. I know a lot of the guys that go out there, and it's boom or bust. If you go out in oil and gas and you're exploring and you're trying to get energy resources, I mean, you're betting, and you got to get capital, and you're betting it, and you're risking it, and you're risking that capital, and you damn well want to get a return on that capital, and that's a good thing. That's how we create a whole lot of the great things we've created in this country, and I don't ever want to disincentivize that. Where there's some agreement here is we need to look at things like the carried interest loophole. When you look at some of the issues where, you know, we might have some agreement or disagreement about where corporations are basically playing games, you know, stock buybacks, you can kind of go either way. My main point is I want to free up capital to go where it is best intended. Where we disagree is a lot of your colleagues, and I won't speak for you, a lot of your colleagues, you know, we want to have a whole lot of subsidies going to, you know, wind and solar and so forth. We just did it in the Inflation Reduction Act last year. I think that is, unfortunately, interfering with the market being able to produce the most reliable energy possible for the most American people, and it's doing precious little for CO2. If you're actual concern for CO2, we'd be generating nuclear power out the wazoo, but we're not. And so instead, we're interfering with the market. We're subsidizing wind and solar. It's driving up electric. It's driving up the cost of EVs. It's driving down the supply of the internal combustion engine. So now the average car is almost $70,000. If you're out there working and you want to go do it, you can't afford that. But I don't think the answer is to then go raise the minimum wage to 20 or 25 or 30 bucks. Because now you've set something that's going to interfere with the market, which I think is depressing economic growth. And the last point I'll make, We're at 32 trillion. We're about to be at 36 trillion because of the disastrous debt deal that was just struck. No offense, but that's directed at Republicans and Democrats. I obviously disagreed. $36 trillion. We're paying more on interest than most of the things. There ain't no more room in the end. Like there, at some point, like, where are these dollars going to come from? And you can tax the holy hell out of corporate America, and you're not going to be able to make up that 36 trillion or the $1.5 trillion we're bleeding every year. We spent $6 trillion in 2021 and 2022 because of COVID. We spent $4 trillion in current dollars for all of World War II. We can't do that anymore. It's destroying us, causing inflation, interfering with the market being able to produce wealth. I want to find where there's common ground. How do we go break the back of that corporate government kind of collusion that is enriching a handful at the expense of many? That's where I think there's a lot of agreement.
You don't think COVID was real? You said COVID relief. You put it in quotes.
Well, because but $6 trillion wasn't needed for COVID relief if you don't shut down the greatest economy in the history of the world.
So we should have shut down?
Oh, hell no. And I said it, and I wrote an op-ed in March of 2020 when Trump shut us down. I said, Mr. President, we need a date certain, and we need it immediately. You can't shut down this economy. Yeah, but you can shut it down for like 2 weeks to, flatten the curve. We all kind of sat back and said, okay, what's going on in Italy? Let's look. But man, once you get through that hump and you've got your, hospitals, are you guys ready? I mean, you got to open up because you can't afford to shut down the economy that literally drives the world.
So, Chip, you do realize 1.13 million people have died from COVID. And if we didn't shut down, it might have been double or triple that. So even a Republican president at the time made the decision to shut some things down because we need to shut down to save lives so that the economy can actually rebound. I would argue, COVID has killed more people, about around the same people, as World War II and the Civil War combined just in a couple years. And so we have to take that into account. We shut down to make sure we save lives so that the economy can actually rebound. Regarding our deficit, 36 trillion, that's a full deficit over many, many years. That's not an annual deficit.
Well,
it's something
we're bleeding $1.5 trillion a year on top of $6 trillion in COVID.
But it's something that has grown over time. It's not something that's
It's
annual.
grown $1 trillion since the debt ceiling deal.
Now, when we talk on the other side of that, we have to talk about revenues, and that's equitable taxes. A flat rate tax code for me, for corporations, would be something about 35%. That's what it was under Reagan, a Republican president. Now, that's the revenue side. But also on the growing the economy side and how we even measure the health and well-being of the economy. I think the way we measure GDP is obsolete, and we need to look at something like well-being. Also, if we invested in Medicare for all, there's some estimates that say we save hundreds of billions of dollars annually if we invest in a universal healthcare system. That's key. In addition to that, we spend so much money right now on incarceration, on healthcare, and on reacting to the harms that are caused in the economy over a lifetime versus investing in the things we need on the early end to grow the economy even further. Areas like universal child care, universal pre-K, paid leave. We invest in our children and our families on the front end at an early age. We offset some of the complex trauma that they deal with that lead to the negative outcomes on the back end. That's my personal point and the point of many on my side. Let's invest in vulnerable communities, vulnerable people to reverse the impact of discriminatory policies like redlining from the past. And let's also invest in our children, our families on the front end so that they can grow to contribute and grow the economy exponentially on the back end. My premise is this. We haven't equitably invested in developing the economy in a way that is beneficial for everyone. Like I said, average American, most Americans can't respond to a $400 emergency. If we did that, and that investment should come from the private sector, yes, but it also should come from the public sector because the public sector has contributed to creating a lot of the wealth that we see even today, from the enslavement of Africans to the Homestead Act, to the GI Bill, and policies like that. That's why there's certain communities that have wealth today and other communities that don't.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to cover. Let me go back to the very first thing you started with respect to COVID. Of course, COVID was a massive national emergency and tragedy with respect to the impact on lives. But my contention is that lockdowns didn't save lives. I don't think the data shows that it did. My contention is that the slowdown of economic growth, the masking policies, all of that stuff didn't actually work. I disagree with President Trump. I did so loudly. I'm an equal opportunity basher of Republicans and Democrats when I disagree with policies.
Which is why I like you.
Well, because I just don't care. I mean, my loyalty is to the Constitution and my constituents and the country, not the party. And so we can talk about that a little bit more if you want, but on the larger issue, because that's the most important here, on in terms of investing. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and the terms you just used, and frankly, a few on my side, they tend to use the term invest as if that it kind of takes away from the taxing part or borrowing part and then spending part on whatever the program is. Because that's what it is. And you can say, well, that's an investment. Well, okay, so education is an investment in kids. Sure. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that. I mean, as a father and as someone who went to the University of Virginia, and Jefferson was extremely invested in the public diffusion of knowledge. That was the actual quote and words behind what he was trying to do with the founding of the University of Virginia, and actually be an advocate for his faults, of course, are well known, but being an advocate for public education in Virginia. And I'm a Texan, proud Texan, go back to the 1850s, but I grew up in Virginia, went to high school in Virginia, went to UVA. So I'm very steeped in public education. K through law school, I was public educated. So was my wife. She's the product of a single mom. My dad's the product of a single mom because my grandfather died of cancer when my dad was 7, and my dad had polio in West Texas. But my perspective is my grandmother was dirt poor, grew up with no shoes, classic West Texas story, picking cotton until her fingers bled. My dad gets sick with cancer, with polio. My grandfather dies of cancer. She's by herself in West Texas. She did have her parents nearby in a small town, Sweetwater, Texas. The federal government wasn't stepping in on her behalf. She got 2 jobs. She busted her tail. She took my dad to therapy, helped him to work, got him through high school. He went through the public education system in West Texas in 1950s. Then went to Texas Tech, was the first to go to college. Story, we've all got those stories.
Me too, first to go to college.
And so, and then I was the product of them, and then I was the first to go to graduate school and go to law school and so forth and so forth. My kids benefit from that. And that's what I see as the American dream. And
I agree with all of that, by the way.
And I know. Where the difference lies is,
I just think government needs to step in sometimes to provide help.
And so where I disagree is there are times, of course, for government to be involved. I, of course, default to the enumerated powers of the Constitution and limited to the federal government. I tend to think that all those engagements are better suited at the state and local level. But importantly, if we could just all agree that, okay, we have to have a certain amount of money and we can only spend a certain amount of money, that I think would solve most of the problems, because then you and I'd be fighting over the dollar to say, okay, do we need a new carrier for the Navy? Well, all right, put that on the books. Do we need to have the FAA making sure planes can fly? Put that on the books. Do we need to honor our Social Security commitments? Put that on the books. But we don't do that, ever. And as a result, it's not just that we're bleeding red ink and we're borrowing money hand over fist. Right now, we have record revenues. Now, you might argue we could have higher revenues, like say increase the corporate rates. Well, I don't have the magic wand to know what that does, right? At some point, you increase rates, you hurt revenue. That's an economic debate, but okay, let's say you and I know the magic number for maximum revenue. That maximum revenue still isn't going to cover all of our expenses right now. We have to come to grips with, we've got to live within our means, or the US dollar is gone, our kids' future is gone, and importantly, you and I are never going to have to do what you have to do with your wife at the table. You have to decide, are we taking a vacation, right? Are we going to buy a new car? Are we going to buy a house? You and I never have to do that. When do you and I ever have to sit down and have that tough conversation? If we did, I promise you and I would then find a way, all right, we disagree on that, we disagree on that, but we agree on that, so let's do that. But we never have to do it. My side goes and says, borrow a bunch of money and buy more carriers. Your side says, borrow a bunch of money and go spend it on a program, an education, a Head Start, or whatever. And then we sit over there, and what happens is a big deal gets cut at the end of the year. You get half of what you want, we get half of what we want, but the American people get screwed with a whole bunch more debt. I think that's wrong.
Yeah, well, just for clarity's sake, I have to do that with my wife all the time because I,
right. So do I.
I'm working class. We
Same.
we make a lot of money if we were single, but we have families.
Kids.
So I got a mortgage back home, got to pay rent here. So it's tough.
Our pay is constitutionally set.
It's tough. A couple points that I just want to respond to. No, I got you. I got you.
We rolling?
No, we're good. A couple points I want to make, and now I want to talk about education.
Yeah,
That's okay. So in terms of our dollar, right? We are a sovereign nation. We have a fiat currency. It's not tied to any natural resource. You know, we can spend money into existence. The point is, to your point, how are we generating revenue and how are we making it on the back end so we are not in this tremendous deficit? But we do have it. You know, it's not like the country's going to fall apart if we don't invest it. That's one point I want to make.
I don't invest it. I don't believe in modern monetary theory and the idea that you can just keep printing money. I think that undermines the dollar. But.
So to a certain extent, I do. But to your point, we're not going to just do that over and over and over again. We don't want. We don't want, in terms of debt to GDP ratio, to be at 300%.
Right.
That's not
which
what
we're barreling towards.
That's what we want, right? The other part, though, we spend so much money on freaking war, Chip. So much money on the military every year, $1 trillion more than the next 10 countries combined. So much money on war throughout American history, right? And so if we can get to a point of more diplomatic solutions and less investment on war, because war is costly, trillions and trillions, tens of trillions of dollars over time, lives, disruption to the economy, all of that, that's where I think we could begin to have those conversations around education or a jet or war, right? You know, books or missiles. And I think that conversation needs to be had. I know you want to respond to that.
I will quickly, and I know you want to move to education.
We want to pivot to education, yeah.
So I'll try to give you a 1 minute type answer on that, which is this. I will carefully and partially agree with your last statement and sentiment in this way. I believe in peace through strength. I believe in having a strong, robust, sparingly used military that is able to defeat any other foe on earth, and that we use it very carefully and sparingly. I believe if you look at the last 20-something years, we have been engaged in sort of endless conflict that has cost us what? 7,077,000 lives. In terms of, or 77,000.
And the Pentagon can't pass an audit.
So, and they can't pass an audit. And look, and I beat up both sides of the aisle on this, and I push back on my side hard on this point. I just hope you'll push back on your side hard for when they fail audits and other aspects of government. My point is just this: we need a strong military. I know you agree with me and how proud we are of our men and women uniformed who serve. We need them to defend this country. I want them to be able to defeat any foe. But we can't be in endless conflict. I co-authored with Barbara Lee, who I disagree on 99% of things, the 2002 AUMF repeal on Iraq. I will work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I hope we've got an agreement after this NDAA with the Speaker to clean up the AUMFs in September. Let's get rid of the old ones. Abigail has the repeal of 1957. There's some other ones. Let's have a new AUMF we all can agree on to go take out bad guys that want to do us harm. But let's make it tight and focused and try to minimize endless conflict. On that, I hope we can find some
100%. So let's talk about education, right? You mentioned you've gone through public schools your entire life.
K through law school.
So did I. K through high school, public education. And it's my background. It's my passion, and I'm here because of what was happening to my kids. What we see in education is the same thing as kind of what we see in the economy, right? Education is excellent for some people, not as good for everyone. And I know many on your side of the aisle want to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education and think it should be super local only. I definitely support locally controlled districts.
But you still see a role for feds.
But I still see a role for the feds in that. The part I wanted to talk about is workforce development, because I believe there's been a disconnect between what's happening.
I'm smelling an area we might agree on.
Anyway. So there's a disconnect between what's happening in our K-12 schools. I think much of it is obsolete. A lot of it we still need it. We still need. But we have to evolve to a 21st century education system. Part of that involves the workforce development piece, because people should come out of high school ready to work if there are jobs available, and we should make sure those jobs are available. For those who want to go to college, fine, absolutely. College is there for them. But college ain't for everybody. Some people just want to work. What are your thoughts on the workforce development piece? I think we do have some agreement there.
Sure. I mean, and again, I'll try to keep it tight to that, because education could consume an hour in and of itself. But as I said, K through law school, public educated, as was my wife. I very much believe that we need to refocus how we are targeting our kids. Some absolutely should go on to 4-year college, go on, do engineering, do whatever.
Choose to.
They choose to. But we've had way too much emphasis and, frankly, pressure on that, which I think has created a situation where you have a bubble of people with 4-year degrees but nowhere to go. And I think that's a problem. And, look, I've got people in my district, I'm sure you do, certainly in Texas where we've got a lot of these kinds of jobs, people looking for welders, can't find them. People looking for air conditioning mechanics, can't find them. People looking for electricians and plumbers, can't find them. These are things where you got some hardworking kids like, do you know you can make $120,000 with a commercial trucker's, driver's license? And they go, wait, what? And, there's a lot of really good jobs out there that would also be tied back to an industrial base in this country that is built in America where we're not, relying entirely on China and other places around the world, so that we have good, good paying jobs here for hardworking Americans. Absolutely believe that ought to be more of the focus. Now, I would prefer that we figure more of that out in Texas, and we are, and we're trying to push. We've got some schools in my district that are doing some great stuff with welding and carpentry, all these different trades, and I think we could do a better job of that. To the extent that we're going to have the Federal Department of Education and have student loans, I would prefer that they be targeted toward those things at least as much or more in order to encourage so many of our Americans who could get some great paying jobs. How many, no offense, but how many sociology majors do you need? I mean, you might need 1 or 2 or 10, but I don't know if we need like 1 million of them, right? But we might need 1 million mechanics.
No, I think we need sociology majors, and I agree with everything you said about the workforce development piece, and particularly around vocational education, vocational training. People who are ready, willing, and able to work with their hands and their bodies.
Right.
That is also excellence, in my opinion. It's not just book smarts that happen in law school or graduate school.
My great grandfather was one of the smartest guys but he didn't. He was a farmer and a janitor.
Now, to that point, we are in the process of transitioning to a green economy, right? Whether you like it or not, it's something I support very strongly.
I still believe in fossil future, but we'll go ahead.
But here's the thing, right? This summer alone, right, in New York, and Texas has dealt with it, when your grid froze, and it was all kind of problems with climate in Texas. That happened recently. This summer in New York, it seems like every week there's monsoon rain, flooding homes, destroying homes, even killing people. And there are days where we can't even go outside because the air quality is horrible because of forest fires from Canada. So there's something happening with our climate that the world, not just me as a Democrat, the world is adjusting to. So part of this transition includes making sure people are prepared to work with their hands in the vocational space for a new climate-driven economy to dramatically decrease and end our dependency on fossil fuels. So this is strong disagreement with us. But when we talk about education, vocational training, we got to get people ready for that workforce. Wind energy is here. Solar energy is here. Geothermal is here. Heat pumps are here. And nuclear, once we learn more about it and make sure it's safe as hell, is going to be here too. And people are going to need to work in those industries in the same way we work in other manufacturing industries right now. And then lastly, when we talk about education, it's connected to the economy. President Biden, whether you like him or not, passed 4 pieces of legislation, 3 bipartisan, the Infrastructure Bill, CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, it was not bipartisan. Yeah. But those 2 bills, CHIPS and infrastructure, connect directly to the idea of workforce development in the way that we're talking about. And that was done by a Democratic President, Joe Biden.
So all done in ways I wouldn't have chosen to do, and all built around an area that I wouldn't have chosen to build it around. Let's go take Texas, for example. My boss, Governor Rick Perry, right up here, I worked for him and helped him with that book. Texas has more wind than any other state in the country. They've embraced wind. We've embraced wind. I think, unfortunately, to our detriment. Our grid is weaker now for it. We now have the reality of barely being able to keep up with the demand and the growth, and it's all being backed by what? Fossil fuels. The grid falls apart without fossil fuels. Because in the middle of the day, when it's sunny and it's windy, whoo, yeah, great, the grid's got this much. When the sun goes down and ain't no wind, where's the power coming from? It's coming from reliable energy, nuclear power. We haven't built a nuclear plant in this country since the 1970s because of the regulatory state. Yet nobody in America has died from a nuclear power plant going down. We've had thousands of Americans who die from accidents and turbines and electrical, So it's just, the world has those kinds of things.
Fossil fuels.
And fossil fuels. I mean, of course, all of it. But the point is, I believe very much that what fossil fuels have done for this world in terms of human prosperity, in terms of what it means for human flourishing, there are 3 billion people on this planet who don't have access to electricity like you and I do. There are hospitals in Africa where they have to squeeze the bag to keep the baby alive, where we've got multiple iterations of power back up in this country.
That was good for a time.
Oh, hold on a second.
No, it's a new time.
Let me finish the last point.
Yep.
I have no problem with migrating to new and innovative power. But what I have a problem with is a forced down approach that's going to harm our people, which it's doing. China is now a third of the world's CO2 production. They have 1,100 coal-fired plants. They're building 2 new coal-fired plants a week. So we sit back and pat ourselves on the back that we're not building any more coal-fired plants. Okay, but what are you doing to our grid? You're making it fully dependent on China. Our grid, our power ability in this country right now is becoming almost entirely dependent on China. We're not able to produce automobiles because we're running around going, oh, the CAFE standards. You get rid of every internal combustion engine in America, you drop CO2 around the world by like 1.1%. It might even be less than that. We can't dent it unless we are driving that engine, so to speak, of exporting liquefied natural gas, expanding on reliable nuclear power, maintaining fossil fuels to maintain our national security advantage, but then work with the globe to do what you need to do to expand the use of liquefied natural gas, nuclear power, and then, yes, wind and solar where it works. Wind and solar will not power this world. There are some developments in geothermal that are growing, but still 80% of the world is getting their power from fossil fuels. And we can't unilaterally disarm to our detriment and undermine the well-being of our citizenry, and I think we're doing that, unfortunately, going down that road so quickly.
We have to transition because we're destroying the planet. And the planet's responding to that.
Well,
right? Talk about.
Let's have another podcast on that alone. Seriously, we'll sit there and we'll spiral.
Absolutely.
Because we just agree to disagree on that one. And let's bring out, I promise you, I'll bring in my friend Alex Epstein, and let's have a robust conversation about it. And you bring somebody on your side of the debate.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Chip, you're a really smart guy. Why are you diving into this woke nonsense? Why do you keep talking about woke? Come on now. You know it's nonsense.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, look, here's
wokeism, the woke mind virus.
This is another
what are we talking about?
This is another one that would be an hour-long podcast. Let me just say this. I do believe that divvying us up by race is not good. Okay? I believe
this is America.
Right. When we shouldn't divvy us up by race.
We've been doing that forever.
Right, and we shouldn't.
We're trying to reverse that.
No. We are actually, as Justice Thomas wrote in the affirmative action opinion just last week. As Justice Thomas wrote in the affirmative action opinion.
Clarence Thomas?
Justice Clarence Thomas.
The one who takes gifts from billionaires. I know you do not support this.
Oh, you want to talk about the book deal that people like to go around and say that Sotomayor is going around selling her books and forcing schools to go buy her books.
I mean that's a book. It's not billionaire. But go ahead, continue.
It's like $2 million worth of book sales that she was forcing through. Anyway, look.
Yes.
The bottom line is Justice Thomas is a friend. He's a good man, as he said last week. You're not going to defeat racialism with more racialism. I agree with John Roberts. If you think, is he squeaky clean, John Roberts, when he said this divvying us up by race is a sordid business. The fact is, I just disagree with breaking us down by race. That's it. I don't believe that we should be, teaching our children that black children are unable to perform at the level of white children, or that somehow that they're being oppressed.
Doing that,
right.
Chip.
But what we're saying is that, you must get a benefit or a hand up or you're not going to succeed. That's crap.
No.
It's total crap.
But that's not what. So that's why I wanted to bring this up. America has a history of racial discrimination. Yes or no?
Of course.
Yes.
It does.
Much of that history and much of racial discrimination continues to this day. You agree or disagree with that?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
I think so.
And racial discrimination is a clean term. My ancestors were enslaved Africans. They worked for 244 years without pay to build America into the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. After the freedom came Jim Crow, the black laws, KKK, lynchings, forced mass migration into the Midwest, the North, the West for a better life. We went for a better life, and even though we were working, we were hoodwinked by a housing market that didn't value our homes and our communities the same way. Globalization took the working man's jobs out of our communities, sent them overseas, race to the bottom. I know you don't like that. But when that happened, no jobs came to replace them. I mentioned the Homestead Act earlier, the Homestead Act, Chip. After the Civil War, gave millions of acres of land to white people, native born and foreign born, to help them build wealth through homes, through towns, through neighborhoods, through communities. And that has repeated itself over time. The people with the most power at that time passed down wealth and power to generations that lead into today, and many of the issues that we still deal with today, redlining, drugs in our communities which impact all communities, underfunding schools, are based on policies rooted in this racial discrimination. So when we talk about things like affirmative action, is to make sure that companies in higher education do not look the other way when you have an exemplary African American or Latino who deserves access into the higher education institutions of our country. Don't look the other way, bring them in. That's what we're talking about. In addition, when we talk about the Supreme Court recent decision, you don't do anything about legacy admission. So you're continuing the elite, you talk about the elite, allowing the elitism to happen in our most prestigious institution. So I don't want us to be divided, but we have been divided and separated and segregated throughout American history. And the last point, I'll let you come in.
I'm letting you roll.
Yeah. Think about this. African Americans have only really been free in this country for about 60 years, since the Civil Rights Act. Because before that, you talk about states' rights and leaving it to the states. Well, there were many states that put barriers in place, didn't allow African Americans to vote. So we have only been free for about 60 years. And now much of the stuff we fought and died for is being rolled back. So the woke conversation is misguided, in my opinion. It is not, let's look at everything through the lens of race and divide. It's acknowledging that everything has already been looked at through the lens of race, and what the hell are we going to do to fix it? Because you got people like Ron DeSantis and others who taken wokeism to a place where no African American history in our schools. Your son should learn African American history.
That's not. That's
book bans.
Both of those are mischaracterizations.
Whoa.
No. Both of those are not true.
The AP watered the hell down the African American history courses in Florida.
No, there were specific changes to the curriculum. I'm not saying they're not going to teach Black history, but
okay.
go ahead. I'm letting you finish.
Book bans and the like. So I'm just saying the conversation on the right about wokeism is misguided. It's not saying merit doesn't matter. Of course merit matters. It's saying, what we're saying when I say I'm woke and stay woke, is be conscious of who we are as a country, be honest about it historically, and let's figure out a way to move forward together and not more divided.
My turn?
I'm done.
Yes. All right. Try and be respectful. This is your podcast. Let me give me your time to set up the thing. Look, there's a lot there. Happy to have a whole separate conversation on that, okay? Because it's worthy, because you can't flush it out in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But what I would say is this. I would say that in terms of what you just outlined, I go back to what I said before. I believe divvying us up by race is not the direction that we should go, all right? Number two, the post-Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, and then subsequently the laws that took 80 years then subsequent to that to get to the place, almost 90 years, to get those enacted, those were very specifically targeted towards dealing with the issue of race. And they were very specific in ensuring that we are not going to discriminate by race, because the goal was to end that. Now, were we flawed and failing to achieve that? Of course. There were also a whole lot of dead Americans, Black and white, who died to end the first piece of that puzzle in terms of killing slavery. And then it took decades of people sacrificing, Black and white, heavily Black Americans fighting for their rights in the 1960s. And heroes like Rosa Parks, heroes that we go down the whole list, and some of our colleagues and former colleagues. in this body that have championed the actual, fulfillment or steps toward the fulfillment of the actual words in the Declaration. All of those things. But look, I'm going to tell you this right now, for all of humanity, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. That's just a truth. I believe that as a Christian. I believe that is scriptural. We are all going to sin. My goal here in this country is to seek a world in which we are viewing it through a race-neutral, colorblind lens. Not blindly, Jamaal, not blind to the implications of the results of slavery when there's blighted parts of towns that are clearly the result of the Jim Crow South or the North in Cleveland or Boston or Philadelphia.
Or New York.
Or New York.
Yeah.
Look, the fact is we have always going to have problems we're going to have to manage there. I just happen to believe that we are better suited doing that through the aspirational goal of teaching our kids to do what they do naturally when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, to not believe that there's any difference between us and our color of our skin, and thus it has been for a long time, but they are trained to believe there's a difference because of the color of our skin. I want to get past that. I believe there are shining examples. Ben Carson is a good friend. Ben Carson, what he's achieved. My 5th grade teacher is the most impactful teacher I've ever had. A black man in Virginia, right? And he tolerated nothing from me. Smacked me upside the head back when you used to be able to do that. And, kept me in line. My liberal, very liberal, AP history teacher in Virginia, when we went over and reenacted John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry, and my character, I died over in the Shenandoah River over on the side. And went up and reenacted Pickett's charge in Gettysburg and learning all of those critical issues about the Civil War and what led to it. All of those are fundamental and should be taught. And all of that history and black history that's associated with that, including the Civil Rights era, of course that should be taught. And I can promise you that Governor DeSantis believes that. We can take issues, bring them in. What they're trying to knock out is what I want to knock out, which is I don't want to be teaching people that this is some that whiteness is somehow, something we should be opposing and that we should be, trying to bring out from our kids, hey, focus on whiteness and how bad it is and apologize for your whiteness. That is all in Ibrahim's books. And I'm just saying, I think critical race theory and I think the DEI is fraught with those problems, but that's a conversation we can have for a longer day. Yeah. I just think that divides us and it doesn't unite us.
So last point, then we do have to wrap because it's 3 p.m.
Okay. Oh, I got a 3 o'clock, don't I?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Ibram X's books.
Yep.
I do not read them the same way you just described. I worked in education for 20 years. I centered ensuring that my kids were seen in the curriculum. And I taught mostly black and brown kids. So that was critical for me. It was important for me. To your point, I'm here in Congress because of my self-determination, my mother, God, my mother, my work ethic, my self-determination, but most importantly, my knowledge of myself. And what we are trying to do in schools and in the country is making sure that young African-American and Latino kids and kids of color learn about their history, their culture, their background, and themselves. Because historically, Chip, that has not been a part of the curriculum. We learn about the dominance of European history, American exceptionalism, and all of that, and we're left out of the conversation in terms of curriculum historically. What we're saying, what I'm saying is, our history, black history and culture need to be an essential part of the curriculum, not just in February, but all year round. We need to learn about each other. Not whiteness is bad or white people are bad, not any of that, but the facts of the matter in terms of American history. White supremacy is bad. White nationalism is bad. Nativism is bad. This idea of the great replacement theory is bad. Historically, stuff like that has contributed to eugenics in our country. And the eugenics movement targeting people of color, targeting Jews from certain parts of Europe and so on. So I think there's a misconception in terms of what we're actually trying to do in schools in terms of curriculum and racial justice and what people who use terms like woke think we are doing in schools.
It's your podcast. You deserve the last word. All I want to do is just say, look, in my perspective, is I do believe in American exceptionalism, and I do believe that this great country has provided more opportunity for more people of all colors, all backgrounds, all sexes than any other nation in the history of the world. and we should be mindful of that.
Yes.
Because if we lose it, I don't know where else we're going to go.
And
black Americans
were a part of
and no one is saying
essential
otherwise.
in creating
And no one
America's
is-
exceptionalism.
And no one is saying otherwise, okay? I mean, well, somebody is, because
Somebody
they
is.
suck. But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
nobody rational is saying otherwise. What I'm saying is, let's focus on that. Let's make that the centerpiece. That American exceptionalism gave us a world in which white Americans bled on the ground to end slavery. Gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
White
Gave
Americans
us,
also enslaved black people.
I agree.
Yeah.
I know.
We
I'm
can't
saying-
skip over that.
No, you can't. But
We
you
gotta
can,
use
but you
it.
can recognize
Yeah.
the American exceptionalism that resulted in ending slavery within 80 years of the imperfect agreement that led to a 3/5 compromise, which is a blight on humanity.
Which
but
tells
was
me I'm
recognized.
not a full man.
But-
So we
but
gotta
which-
have
which-
another podcast.
But which was done to minimize the power of the South.
I hear you, but what I want to say, and thank you for allowing me to say
And
another
finish
thing.
your podcast.
But there's a different interpretation of these things. When I see 3/5 compromise, I understand what happened then.
Right.
But for me, that tells me I'm not a full man. And when we talk
get
about,
it.
and that's horrific. And when we talk about American exceptionalism, of course, love the country, want the country to do well. But then that tells me that other countries are inferior to us.
They are.
But that way of thinking,
Right.
that way of thinking leads to more conflict and more war and more death versus diplomacy.
It's also a
We got to come
recognition-
together as a human race, Chip.
Okay.
To solve big
But
problems.
sovereignty also matters. The rule of law matters.
There
and
are
American
no lines.
exceptionalism
We
matters.
created those lines.
Right, for reasons.
For-
Because we have a shared set of values and beliefs that bring us together as a people so that we can then do what we've done for the world, where we have literally liberated hundreds of millions of peoples around this world because of our actions in World War II, World War I. We have never gone around the world for the most part.
Can we liberate without war? And can we live as one people on this planet in peace? That's the question for the next podcast.
Amen.
All
Hey,
right.
thanks, man. Thanks for coming down
Give
here.
me hugs, man.
Appreciate
Give me hugs,
it.
man. Appreciate it.
Yep,
Thank you for
thank
the
you.
time.
Appreciate
Good
it.
to be
Thanks,
here.
guys.
Of course, of course.